Good morning again. My name is Clemence and I'm from Safety Chain. I will be your webinar host today and we'll start with a quick few items. I want to change the slide. So what's FSMA Friday? If you're new to FSMA Friday, these are monthly FSMA related news updates, regulatory changes and updates, industry trends, and obviously a Q&A with the Acheson Group at the end. This event is brought to you by the Acheson Group and Safety Chain. We'll go through a few housekeeping. So only the panelist microphones are on. Ask your Q&A questions at the end or start popping them in the chat. Our team will be monitoring and getting those to me so that I can ask them to our presenter today. The recording will be shared at the end. And if you have any audio issues, please use the call-in number. So today's presenter is Tony Lukas. Hi, Tony.
Good
Welcome.
morning.
So Tony is a director of food, safety, and dietary supplements at the Acheson Group. He spent more than 12 years across the food, beverage, and dietary supplement industries, including time at PepsiCo, General Mills, and Standard Process. Labels, which is today's topic, are very much his world. Over his career, he's personally designed and reviewed hundreds of labels for finished products, and allergen control is one of his core passions. So he's exactly the right person for today's conversation on label verification. He's also been in the room for the hard parts of this job. He's helped companies work through FDA audits, warning letters, and recalls, and guided them to certifications across USDA organic, multiple GFSI schemes, GMP, and others. And there's a personal reason Tony does this work on labels. As a child, he was hospitalized 3 separate times for major foodborne outbreaks, and he's built his career around making sure that doesn't happen to other people. When he's not working, you'll find him in his woodshop or out in the forests of northern Wisconsin or playing disc golf near his home in Milwaukee. Again, good morning and welcome.
Good morning.
We'll go through the agenda. So today, as per usual, we'll go through any recent regulatory updates. Then we'll have Tony's presentation on label verification. Then we'll have a Q&A, and then at the end, we'll have a curated safety chain demo. So it's over to you, Tony.
Sounds good. We're going to start with the recent regulatory updates. First one that was announced at the end of May. The FDA is announced that they are going to modernize and strengthen the pesticide monitoring program. The monitoring is going to be risk-based sampling, focused specifically towards infants and children first, specifically foods consumed by infants and children first. Then they are looking to update procedures, methodologies, and then create a little bit more of a collaborative environment with other FDA centers, other federal agencies, states, and local counterparts. Next, another one, just a reminder at the start of July for anybody who does business in the EU that the official BPA ban starts at the beginning of July. That encompasses all food packaging and expands on the existing ban previously with baby bottles. So today's topic, and we'll get started here, is label verification. I'm going to be talking you through some of the things I've seen, some of the things that I've done relating to label verification. So to start it off, this is kind of the generalized definition. People may have different opinions on this, but the way I would interpret it is the process of label verification includes having all of the mandatory and optional information on a product label reviewed for accuracy, compliance to all regulatory requirements, depending on which regulatory domain you sit in, and then using the correct version of your labels on your production runs. So the first poll here is going to be...
Oh, thank you. That's okay. So we'll go through some poll questions, and we'll have 4 throughout Tony's presentation, and I'll go ahead and read them out. So, number one, how do you verify labels today from artwork to finished products? Is it A, manual against a paper checklist, B, spreadsheets or shared docs, C, a digital system but not built for label control, or D, a dedicated version controlled label verification system? I'll give you a few seconds to answer. Okay, let's close the poll. All right, well, it seems, Tony, once we have closed the poll, that the majority is manual checks against the paper checklist, or there's also spreadsheets and shared docs.
And that would be what I've seen the most when going into facilities. Majority of companies are still doing more of the manual checks or doing it on their own proprietary spreadsheets that they create. So this is
Thank you.
kind of what I was expecting to see. All right. So now the question is, what is label verification? We went over the definition. So why is it important for your company? Well, the first reason is because if you're not doing correct label verification, it can lead to recalls. In 2024, labeling errors accounted for right around 45% of all recalls in the United States, according to the FDA data. Now, there are a lot of reasons for recalls. So the fact that labeling errors accounted for 45% is an insanely huge number, considering it should be something that's designed and created ahead of time. It's not a manufacturing error live at a moment's notice. It's something you plan ahead and yet still accounts for that high of a percent. The estimation is that it accounted for $1.92 billion in direct losses. So when I say direct losses, we're talking about the actual costs of whether you have to throw something away, the recall. If you do a recall, it causes you to have to reproduce product, things like that. The indirect costs can include other things such as lost time, the labor, some of the reprints, extra paperwork, all the things that cause you to spend time worrying about it, and all the extra little things you have to do around the office. After a recall, you may be punished. I don't want to say punished, but you may have insurance premiums go up. You may have reputational and PR costs for future business. Those are not calculated into that 1.92 billion. And so those costs really go up when you're talking about having a potential something as simple as a label error. Next, why is it important? Lawsuits. Lawsuits create reputational harm. They're public knowledge. Sometimes they're blasted all over the news. It causes a lot of consumer confidence issues in your brand. Some of the most common reasons for lawsuits that I've seen out in the world are for labeling with missing allergens, inaccurate nutritional facts or nutritional claims, sourcing or manufacturing claims. That's more of a country of origin, manufactured in this place, but you're using ingredients from other countries. Slack fill lawsuits. So whether or not you're putting on your labels that the product may settle, or this product is intentionally only filled to this amount for this reason, if you're not putting that on the label, it can cause more lawsuits. Misleading images, false health claims, and inaccurate ingredient claims, something like grass-fed. And lawsuits or issues coming up can come from multiple ways. Can come from the FDA, the FTC. Law firms can take action, direct consumers. There's class actions. And my favorite, first time getting to use this, I've always wanted to use this in a plural form, but attorneys general, if you do interact with the state level. And then finally, it's very important, and the most important reason for having correct labels is you could potentially harm your consumers with an incorrect label. Incorrectly labeling things like allergens can lead to a SACOTA, which is serious adverse health events or death. Another thing to remember, there's more than just the major 9 allergens out there for individuals. Incorrect ingredient list means someone allergic to something other than those major 9 may not know it's in there. I have so many people that I've run into that have allergies for things like strawberries or pineapple, and if you're not listing that on the label correctly, people can have very serious issues. And then, of course, the guilt of accidentally hurting someone. Extremely important, and I've dealt with companies who have gone through this, and it's tough to go through that, the guilt and the shame of knowing that you could have done something better and somebody was hurt as a result of it. So we're going to go over what I would consider the categories of label information. You have your mandatory labeling information. That's everything the FDA in the US says that have to be on, or USDA have to be on a label. There's optional labeling information. That would be things that you don't have to have on there, but you can choose to, whether it's for marketing purposes or sales. And then the third one that I have listed here, which is more of a categorized in the optional labeling, but I like to separate it, is marketing claims and images. So the mandatory label information. This is a generalized list. It's not to the entirety, depending on which type of product you have, whether the finished product is an import, there will be some more mandatory information found on there. But in general, your principal display panel will have to have a statement of identity, a product name if it's different from a statement of identity, and a net quantity statement. On the packaging, you also have to have things like the name and address of manufacturer or packer or distributor, an ingredient list, a nutritional facts panel. If you have allergens, you have to have your allergens listed out, any of the major 9 here in the US. You have to have your serving size, servings per container if applicable, and there are other things that are required if you fall into more of a niche space. Optional labeling information. Although these are optional, if you decide to put something on the label that is optional and you have it incorrect or demonstrably false, that can be just as detrimental and dangerous to having your product recalled off the market. A UPC barcode is not required by the FDA for food products or dietary supplements, but it does obviously help your retailers and consumers. Precautionary allergen labeling, PALs. This may contain, which is also another statement, made in a facility which also processes, et cetera, et cetera. Those statements do not 100% protect you from liability. You do have to make sure that your facility is properly cleaning and segregating allergens and making sure those don't end up in your product. But those are important statements, but they have to be demonstrably true. Other optional information can be health claims, could be qualified health claims, structure function claims, and nutrient content claims. There's going to be things like if it's a good source, an excellent source, you can't make those claims unless you can prove it to be true. So don't use them unless you're absolutely sure. And then finally, optional labeling information, images and marketing, what I like to call fluff. Anything else that marketing team or sales team likes to put on there to help sell your products. So let's move on to common reasons for label verification errors. Some of the most common reasons for errors are going to be due to things that you're doing in your facility or in your company. Changes to formulas, changes to label design. Those are 2 common ones where if you change a formula, you have to verify the label ingredient statement or anything else on the label doesn't also need to be changed. Sometimes you do make changes to the label design for marketing purposes and not necessarily a formula change. Despite doing those marketing changes, you still have to verify that the information put on there is correct. Sometimes there are errors with the printer. It could be uploading an incorrect revision. It could be doing, having poor communication with them. Sometimes there are communication breakdowns between departments. Sometimes departments don't know which whether operations may not know that the label needed to change for the next run. And then finally, there are sometimes incorrect or missing information from your ingredient suppliers where you may not get the full ingredient list and you're missing items that should be on the ingredient statement of your final label. So, along the process for doing label verification, there are potential breakdowns. Those areas for potential breakdowns could be in the following areas. First one would be the label design. It's the initial design, or if you're doing changes. Next is the sending and ordering from the printer. Next will be verifying upon arrival to your facility. Then using incorrect labels on the equipment during the run. And final verification before release of the finished product. We're going to go through each one of these after this poll.
Thank you, Tony. I will do the poll. So where in your process is a label error most likely to slip through? Is it A, design or artwork changes, B, ordering or proofing with the printer, C, verifying label rolls when they arrive, or D, the wrong version getting loaded on the line? I'll give you a few seconds to answer. Looks like we have three main answers, one of which is by far surpassing the others. Okay, let's close the poll, please, team. All right, so it looks like, Tony, the 54% is the wrong person version getting loaded on the line, and then 37% design or artwork changes.
That's kind of where I expected this one as well. Oftentimes communication breakdowns with your operations team, knowing which correct version needs to get on the line is a common error. It happens. And that's why obviously communication, labeling, proper labeling, and making sure your ops team is 100% on board with exactly what's happening according to the schedule. It's extremely important, especially if you're doing split runs with multiple revisions.
Thank you.
So next is going to be, or as we start, here are the prevention methods. So label design. One of the first things you do when you're designing a label, and I'm sure a lot of you use this, are the checklists or a digital program to verify that all of the mandatory information is present on the label. And you have to make sure that the correct sizing, the correct location, you have to have everything on the PDP. Everything has to be correct. That's mandatory. In addition to that, your label creator should be able to confirm all optional information is correct, and you have the documentation to back it up. You can't put a USDA organic sticker or stamp on your label without having that approved before. You can't put gluten-free on your product without having that confirmed. You have to verify the formula is correct and it matches exactly what's in your ingredient statement. One idea that I see commonly used is using version numbers for each your formula and your label. One technique could be to potentially hide your version numbers in the corners to know which version is being used. Sometimes you can hide it in the corner and the consumers may not even notice. Records and version control. So one thing you want to do is always keep records of your formula versions and your label versions. One thing to recommend here would be to connect all of your label versions to a formula version number. For example, the example I use here is version 6 of a formula may have 3 different versions of a label that can be used due to marketing changes rather than mandatory changes. So if you did accidentally use any of those 3 different revisions, as long as you're running version 6, it wouldn't be necessarily a recall requirement if something did go wrong. However, every label should be connected to a formula version in your database, whether that's physical paper or you have it in your ERP system or your production documentation. Document when you are switching revisions of a label. If you don't have the revision number on there, and even if you do, I highly recommend documenting exactly what changed from one label to the next so you don't have to guess when going back and looking at what changed. Next poll.
Okay, so third poll. Are your label versions formally linked to a formula or spec version in a controlled record? A, yes, every label version maps to a formula version. B, partially, we track versions, but not the linkage. C, no, version control is informal or inconsistent. Or D, not sure. And we'll give you a few seconds to answer. Okay, team, let's close the poll. All right, interesting result here, Tony. So we have partially, we track versions, but not the linkage at 52%. And then we've got every label version maps to a formula version, or no version controls informal or inconsistent. So quite the mix, although the partially surpasses everything else.
I am happy to see that 20% of you are doing the version maps to a proper formula or to your formula. I highly recommend for those who don't is to always have that linkage. You always want to, anytime a change is made to formula or a label, you should be checking one or the other and formally creating that link. It is a good way to make sure that you're always double checking every single time any change is made.
Thank you.
So next, when sending and ordering from the printer, although there was very few of you that indicated that this was an issue or you have, is commonly an issue, it does happen. So when you're ordering from your printer, you want to verify that the label they received is the exact same version number that you do have your product labeled, and that the date was sent to them was correct. And if possible, can you review the label once it's entered into the printer's digital portal? You want to check all mandatory and optional information and make sure the crossover or the formatting remains the way it is. I have gone into printer portals where they change the format and suddenly some of the information is not visible, or it kind of gets grouped together or jumbled together where it's not visible separately. And something like that cannot occur with mandatory information. You have to make sure everything is separated and very completely visible with the correct sizing. It did not sound like, I think it was nobody clicked this part, but when arriving in the facility, when the label rolls arrive, they should be reviewed with a checklist, which is probably what I see most common. Or I have started seeing, and what we investigated with my last company was an AI review program that manually, the AI system will review to make sure it matches up with your digital copy. You want to make sure, obviously, the version number is identical, as well as all of the mandatory information, especially the allergens, are present, as well as any optional information. Your version number and the rest of the label should be logged into inventory and receive a confirmatory signature, and everything is logged in your ERP or in general your system. So, using incorrect labels on equipment during a run. It sounded like this was the most common error, and it is common. When you're running a lot of different products and you're trying to get as much product out as you can, errors happen. So the operators that are running the packaging equipment should know exactly which label versions they're running that day or that hour. You should have, one suggestion is to put up a placard or on the computer screen with the production schedule, formula, or have the label versions available at the equipment with the production paperwork. If you are using multiple label versions for the same formulation during a run, you want to make sure you have a clean break and a lot change, and change out the placard or update the screen when the change is made. So if you're running the same formula, but you're just trying to run out stock of a previous version, that's fine. Just make sure you have an official lot change for traceability purposes, and then move on to the next label. And obviously, when you have the placard up, make sure that gets changed at the same time so the operators know exactly which one is going. If you are only using one version of the label for a run, place all one technique that we always used at my last place was to place any previous label versions of that product in a controlled or a locked cabinet, almost like a quarantine cabinet, so they cannot be accidentally used again on another run. Finally, final verification before release of the finished product. You should have your label team verify labels are correct on finished product. Many of you are doing finished product testing. During that finished product testing, when you're keeping retains for your records and for FDA requirements, you should also be verifying the label, including verifying that the mandatory information and optional information is correct. Compare labels to what is listed on the scheduled run batch records. And on your batch records, you should also include which labels and which formula should be used. So you should be putting the versions in there. And then keep records of all of the labels used, including the notes when they change. One thing to remember, that label verification is most definitely a cross-functional process. It's not just the label team or marketing creating the label or your FSQA team. You should also include R&D, which in many companies, R&D is the one creating the formulas. They should be signing off that the formulas are correct. Obviously, you should be very partnered up with your operations and scheduling team to make sure that batch records and production paperwork properly indicates which revision and which formula is going to happen, and that your operators know exactly which labels to be pulling out of your storage to be putting on for the run that day. Your marketing and sales team should also be involved. They should know exactly what's going on and when the products are running, so they know exactly who they're talking to and when the product that they're trying to sell is on the market. So when do you bring in the label team? The label team should be brought in anytime something is changing, whether it's marketing making a subtle change to the label, whether R&D is making a formula change. The label team should be involved in all of those discussions. And then finally, who should be signing off on label changes? Obviously your label team, but the other departments in this cross-functional department should be considered to be added to something like a change management system for label changes. I understand people may be browsing through this rather quickly and moving forward with it. So this might slow things down, especially if you have hundreds of SKUs going out. You don't want this to slow down, and you're worried, some people might be worried that people are going to pass through this very quickly. One of the techniques we did with this at my last company was to dedicate certain parts of the label for review so that when certain departments go in, they're looking at various parts of the label, so everyone only has a smaller piece, and they physically sign off saying this is present. So from a final summary of this, one thing to remember is that label errors are an absolutely huge reason for recalls, loss of profits, we're talking multi-billion dollars, and the worst part about labeling errors are that it could injure or hurt your consumers. Label verification is a cross-functional team process, and it should be treated as change management. And finally, there are multiple ways to improve label verification. Some of the examples I used today were just techniques that I've seen at customers at companies when visiting, or some of the techniques that I've used at previous companies that I've worked at.
Okay, well, thank you, Tony, for your presentation. It was very insightful. We'll have one last poll asking to I'm going to ask to the audience. So, audience, in the last 24 months, has a labeling error caused a recall, a halt, or rework, or near miss at your facility? Is it A, yes, recall or market withdrawal? B, yes, caught internally as a halt, rework, or near miss? C, no, but we know the risk is real. And D, none of that we're aware of. So we'll give you a few seconds to answer. All right, team, let's close the poll, please. So we have option 2 being the major answer, which is yes, caught internally as a hold, rework, or near miss. And then number 2, no, but we know the risk is real. Glad we didn't have the option number 1 as the major one, right, Tony?
Very much, yeah. I'm so happy to see that most of you have not had to deal with a recall or a market withdrawal. Those are horrible situations, and some of the worst moments in people's careers in the food industry revolve around recalls or withdrawals. As far as the second one, when you're catching it internally before it goes out the door, that's great that you caught it. But the issue there still is you lose time, you lose money. Sometimes you have to do rework. You're still losing money. You're still having to take the time and pay for all of these issues. It's so simple. A single word in your allergen statement can cause a massive reverberation in your entire company. So it's good that you're doing that. But the goal here is to remember that this is a process, and continuous improvement is always something that every company should be striving for. And that includes with your label verification process. Try to make it, I guess the word here would be as bulletproof as possible. But the idea is that you should have it set up so that there is not a way you could make an error as long as the process is followed.
Thank you very much, Tony. That was very insightful information. I think now what we'll do is we'll move on to our Q&A section. And I'm going to start with a couple of questions from the audience asked during registration to today's webinar. So number one, what are emerging trends in labeling?
Yeah, I would say the two things that I see most common right now. The first one is going to be California's label, in general, packaging recycling. So a lot of companies reaching out about how to make sure it's less what you put on the label, but what the labels are being made of. And so that's a big one right now, I believe, making sure that your packaging is recyclable. Specifically the labels. And then number two, I would say, is I see a lot of companies getting very towing the line between what is legal and what is not. And I believe it's a lot of push from marketing to try to sell the products. It is an extremely competitive market. So any edge you can get is great. But when you are making statements, again, optional statements, you have to be very cautious. Some of that marketing fluff can put you over the edge, and all of a sudden you get a letter from the FTC saying you can't say that, using an image that's inappropriate in the context, whatever it is. Be very cautious. Have an open discussion with your marketing team, and don't think of them, I hope there are marketing folks on here. A regulatory and label team and marketing should work hand in hand. It's a good group to work with, and regulatory team should be providing guidance for marketing to make sure they know how far their boundaries can go.
Great. Thank you so much, Tony, which goes very well with the second question we received. How much time would you recommend allowing for certification between artwork completion and submitting to printers?
I would say if you have that change management process set up for your label verification, if you do perform that, as soon as all the sign-offs are done, I believe that's enough time. That would be adequate time to go for the order. The only thing that could slow it down is if maybe there's another marketing push coming up, or you have a need to use up old materials and you want to do that. But as long as the sign-offs are done, I don't think there's any additional time needed, as long as everybody and your cross-functional team has signed off on it.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to move on to the audience from today's chat. So I believe it was Amin. Amin asked, is there a platform where we can find the regulatory updates? So you shared that at the start of the webinar. Is there a specific platform there, Tony?
Specifically, I get the FDA newsletter. There are email blasts from multiple companies. Obviously, my tag does some. There are email blasts from multiple companies out there. I highly recommend a good number of them. If you want to reach out specifically for which ones, more than just those, please feel free to reach out, and Clemence will send a message to me. I can give you a whole list of all sorts of them. My email inbox is filled with 5 or 6 every morning, and it's so extremely helpful to have those, so you know exactly what's being discussed, even if it's nowhere near going into regulation. It's nice to know that something might be a year away from happening.
Thank you very much, Tony. Second question. For single ingredient product that is packed in bulk, 50 pounds or more, is it mandatory to have nutritional panel and ingredient statements?
If you are selling that at a retail establishment, you should have paperwork that indicates that that information is available for the consumer. If you are selling it to another retailer, you should have that information given to them before you send it out the door. They should know exactly what they're getting. As far as in a retail establishment, the consumer has a right to know exactly what's in there. So you should have an ingredient statement and a statement of identity to be able to present them there.
Thank you. And then we'll have another one. Is there any software that you would recommend for smaller companies of around 10 to 12 artwork reviews annually? I know you mentioned using an AI platform, but do you know of any other softwares?
For a company that small, the price might be a little steep on some of the new and emerging AI software. I don't have the names of the companies right now. I can look them up for you if you reach out to Clemence, and I can provide the names of the companies that we looked through at my last company. It's an emerging technology, so it is a little pricey right now, but there are a number of them out there trying to get into this niche. I highly recommend looking at it as an opportunity for your company, but again, the price is going to be a little steep right now.
Thank you. Then we have another one. This one is from Richard. If a company has hundreds of labels without the 9th allergen sesame, can the labels be used?
If you're using sesame in your product, you cannot sell it on the US market without being labeled for sesame. Sesame is officially needs to be labeled in the US market.
Thank you. Another question. So you mentioned that about 45% of recalls in 2024 came down to labeling errors. When you see those errors up close, what's usually the root cause? Is there a process breakdown, a technology gap, or a people and training issue?
To be honest, it's usually label design missed something, and then the full review process afterwards. It's kind of like, it's astounding how many there are, because each one of these is a multitude of failures where there should be multiple people looking over this and looking at it from each company. And yet it's kind of like a perfect storm, just keeps happening over and over, even with multiple fail safes. So that's why, in general, I recommend more of a formalized review process where people are dedicated to looking at specific parts. So someone is always checking allergens. Someone is always checking net weight or ingredient statement. It's almost comical how it turns out to be the perfect storm of errors repeatedly. And I do think it's a little bit due to diffusion of responsibility. People just sign off on it thinking it's good to go, even though they should be reviewing a little bit more detailed. So that's where checklists and almost AI software does help out. That being said, I don't believe pushing everything to AI to do for us is a great idea at this time. You still need to have people doing proper reviews.
Thank you. We have another question from the audience. Erin asks, does the FDA have a stance or allowance like the USDA temporary approvals to run out packaging with an over declaration due to a formula change? And if so, is there an ETA of how soon a packaging update is expected?
So I wouldn't say there's a hard rule for this. There is. It depends on what is the incorrect part of the label. So obviously, if it's an allergen, there is no wiggle room. If it's something like you're using an ingredient where it's in the incorrect order, they're both at 2% or one's at 2.1 and 2.0, and you have it incorrect, I don't believe that that's more of a technical violation, and it's not likely you would ever have to do anything in a recallable sense. But the FDA will definitely tell you if they see that and you're reported, they will tell you need to change your label, and you should. But if it's not something that is missing from the label, again, if it's an ingredient out of order, nobody's going to get hurt from that. And I'm not advising you to use anything incorrect on the market. What you use on your product should be correct. But the reality of it is, yes, labels cost money, and you don't want to have to throw away $10,000 of labels because one ingredient is out of order. So I don't advise you to use it. However, yeah, I don't believe that's anything that's worth recalling in situations like that, but it will be situational.
Thank you. Okay, now let's go back to allergen, because allergen mislabeling, as you mentioned in your presentation, is perhaps the most dangerous one a label can carry. So where in the verification process do allergen errors most often slip through, and which controls are best at catching them before a recall?
I see a lot of label errors occur when people are reviewing their incoming raw materials. Properly getting all information from your raw material suppliers is extremely important to know what you're working with. If an ingredient has a processing aid, for example, that includes soy or sesame, things like that, you have to make sure that whether you need to label it or not, because highly refined generally means you don't. But what if it's not highly refined? And so that would be early on, and then when R&D is doing development on it, the most common times they're missed are when they are additives or compound ingredients that have processing aids that you do need to label, but they're not the overall name of the ingredient. It's more of a sub ingredient, and that's where a lot of allergens are missed.
Thank you very much. Now, we're going to talk maybe about something that we've not yet mentioned is when we're working with co-manufacturers, how do you manage version control and verification when you don't control the facility doing the labeling?
Yeah, that is a very difficult question because it is tough to put your trust into a company that to produce your product and to make the product, send it out into the world with your company's name on it, and your reputation on the line. Now, one of the major things that I think would help is having, something similar is obviously they have to make sure they have the correct production records and specifications when they're creating their batch records. So big one would be making sure you're using and reviewing proper batch records. But one of the simplest things that I've seen is when printers send over the rolls of materials, even if you don't have the version number on the label, is on the sticker, not the sticker, but the piece that holds the rolls together is sometimes having the name of the label with the version number on there. That can help co-manufacturers understand they're using the correct one if your version number's not on there. But something as simple as putting the version number somewhere in the corner or hidden on the label, that can help your co-manufacturer understand if they're using the right one, because yeah, it isn't their product. but it does mean as much to them to produce it correctly as it does to you. They don't want to lose your business either. And they
That's
certainly
very
don't
true.
want to, hurt any consumers.
Very, very true. Now we have another person, Georgette, asked, stemming from Erin's question, what if there is an ingredient that has been removed so it's over declared?
So over declaring is still incorrect. Again, it would be sort of the same situation. If it's an allergen, it would be more serious. But you are correct. Sometimes that does happen where you remove a processing aid or an ingredient is removed. Technically, it's still not correct per FDA regulation. However, if it's not related to allergens and it's a very small amount in there, I don't believe I've seen a situation where there was a recall associated with that. If it's a kind of more of an inert ingredient, but over labeling is still not officially correct by any means. But yeah, I would put it on a lower risk, pending it is one of those more inert ingredients.
Perfect. And then we'll have one last question before we move to the demo. If a director watching this webinar today could make just one change to their verification process starting Monday, where should they start, in your opinion?
Change management of change, whatever you want to call it. Create a sign-off system so that multiple people from cross-functional teams are looking at the labels to make sure exactly what everybody, whether it's operator to marketing to the FSQ team, everybody has to know what's going on and to know the correct information and labels are being used. It's extremely important to be completely in sync with one another. This is one giant ballet and everybody's in it together.
Thank you very much, Tony. And thank you again for your insights, very valuable. The audience, for the audience for participating as well. Now, we're going to go back as we prepare for the demo. Just wanted to share with you, there were a few questions. If we can put the presentation back on, please, team. So I'm going to talk about next month's FSMA Friday. So it will be with Freeman Libby of the Acheson Group, who's the Director of Food Safety. And the topic will be about the commodities most likely to cost you, a fraud risk primer for food and beverage manufacturers. You can register now. It's available on safetychain.com. And we're going to talk about the resources. There were a few questions asked. So there are many resources out there. Industry e-guides, webinars, videos, success stories, solution consultation. You can find those on the Acheson's website or also on Safety Chain's website as well. Now we're going to move on to Ian of Safety Chain, who's going to show us how Safety Chain can help us, help the audience with label verification and processing. Over to you, Ian.
Thank you, Tony. Another great webinar, this time on label verification. It's a very hot topic and a lot of great information covered today. There are many solutions you can put in place at your plant, but today we're going to walk through one you can put in place right away with Safety Chain. How can you do a first piece label verification at the start of your production runs to prevent mislabeling, mispackaging, and potentially costly errors at your plant? So the first thing you'll see here is we'll go directly in to the Safety Chain mobile application. This should look familiar to all the Safety Chain customers out there, but if you're not familiar, it's a really simple platform designed to make your lives automated and a lot easier on the plant floor. Bob Sanders here is assigned one task to complete a first piece label verification at the start of the run, and we'll walk through it together on my tablet. I'll put in an item number, and then I've got to type in the sell by date. You'll notice as I put in June 25th, 2026, it actually automatically fails because this is a characteristic I have set up in the system to go 1 year out from the date of production of the resource that we're testing. In this case, it's the Nature's Recipe at the USA Atlanta facility. We're also going to take a picture of this, and I do have a product we'll be showcasing today. So I'll attach from my camera the sell-by date, and you'll notice it actually is a bit smudged, so it is a real-life scenario, and I'm going to say this sell-by is not acceptable. You'll notice right away I'm prompted with the correction. I can type in my own correction, or in this case, I'm going to stop the line, notify the supervisor, ensure we're getting the correct date printed on our bags before we start running at full speed. We're also going to scan the UPC. This is also configured as a characteristic. So if I was to scan the wrong UPC, this would fail. I'll show you by just deleting one character of the UPC code, you can see the check is set up to fail. So we're building in error proofing into your process to ensure it's easy for your operators to make sure they're running the correct product. We'll just take another picture of the product here, and you'll get to see the cute doggy on the packaging. And then we'll finish off with a target weight, the pallet number, and an allergen declaration that we have completed for this product. So submitting that removes it from my task list, and we'll go show you in Safety Chain how that data looks, feels, and how we can take action if something is wrong. So you'll notice this record did fail, submitted by Bob Sanders. It came in just now, and because that sell-by was unacceptable, we're going to denote the failure. But you do see that we have the pictures attached here, we have the item number, and we have record of this, ensuring that you're always going to get the right first pass product out the door with as little errors as possible. Safety Chain's flexible platform allows for great data analysis really quickly. So taking a look at all the images contained in my label verification forms, I'll be able to see in an instant the forms that we have shipped and the products we have shipped in the last 6 months and whether or not we have passed our label verifications. So when a customer complaint comes or a different research point from your operations or quality team, you can take a look at all the information in just a few clicks in a really short time. In addition to this, we recommend our customers utilize the Safety Chain document repository to store the most up-to-date labels as well as item information, and then attaching it down to the end-level process for your teams to have. So searching for label in my 2,000 plus documents, I'll be able to sort and filter really quickly down to the 22 that I have, with 7 being expired. Ensuring teams are always updating the most up-to-date labels for products and giving your teams the best method for sending out the right product on the first try. Now, I hope this brief look into Safety Chain was helpful today. Once again, my name is Ian Hildebrandt, and I'm on the solutions team with Safety Chain. If you have questions and you're an existing customer, please get in touch with us, and our customer success manager or coach can help you implement some label verification processes at your plant. Or if you are not a Safety Chain customer and are curious about our functionality and how it could fit for your plant, please get in touch and we'd be happy to walk through and see if we're a good fit for you. So take care and thank you for joining today. And we look forward to seeing you next month on our FSMA Friday webinar. Bye.
Thank you, Ian. I love the hands-on approach, the hands-on demo. So that's it, folks, for today. Thank you for joining and for participating. And thank you to Tony Lukas and Ian Hildebrandt for their guidance. We're going to email you shortly the presentation deck, and I'm looking forward to see you all again in July next month. Bye, everyone.